Hey guys, welcome back to Mr. Cursed. Today's October special is going to keep you up at night. I've got 8 bone-chilling real stories from deep in the Appalachian Mountains. Trust me, after hearing these, you'll never look at those woods the same way again. These aren't just scary tales. People actually lived through this stuff. But real quick, before we dive into the darkness, hit that subscribe button and smash the like. Share this with your friends if you dare. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. All right, let's get into these terrifying encounters. I'm 26 years old, and I've been delivering pizzas for Domino's for about 8 months now. I know that probably sounds pathetic for someone with an engineering degree, but student loans don't care about your qualifications when nobody's hiring. The mountains around here don't offer much work anyway, especially not for someone like me who moved up from Charlotte thinking things would be cheaper. They are cheaper, but the jobs pay less too, way less. So when I got that call on October 12th asking for 40 pizzas to be delivered to Copper Creek Mine at 2 a.m., I didn't even hesitate. Triple delivery fee plus a guaranteed $100 tip? I would have delivered to the moon for that kind of money. The order came in around 11 p.m. through our fax machine, which was weird enough. Who uses fax machines anymore? But the details were specific. 10 pepperonis, 10 sausages, 10 supreme, and 10 Hawaiian. All large. Cash on delivery. The address listed was just Mine Shaft 7, Copper Creek Road, followed by a hand-drawn map that looked like it had been photocopied about 50 times. Our manager, Dave, was scratching his head over it, but money is money. Copper Creek Mine shut down in 1952 according to the historical marker I'd passed on some back road, but maybe someone was doing renovation work or something. Night shifts happen, industrial work happens, and industrial workers get hungry. The drive started normal enough. I loaded all 40 boxes into my Honda Civic, had to put the passenger seat all the way forward and stack them to the ceiling. The mountain roads got narrower as I climbed, and my GPS kept losing signal, so I had to rely on that hand-drawn map. It was surprisingly detailed, showing every turn and landmark. Whoever drew it knew these roads well. The further I got from town, the quieter everything became. No other cars, no house lights, just my headlights cutting through thick woods on both sides. When I finally reached what the map labeled as the mine entrance, I almost turned around. The place looked like it had been abandoned for decades. There was a chain-link fence with a gate hanging open, and beyond that, the mouth of Mine Shaft 7 was boarded up with old, weathered plywood. Except the boards had been torn off from the inside. Fresh splinters were scattered on the ground, and I could see nail marks scraped into the wood like someone, or something, had clawed their way out. The strangest thing was the air pressure. As soon as I got out of my car, my ears popped painfully, like when you're on an airplane. Breathing felt difficult, like the oxygen was wrong somehow, thicker. I grabbed my flashlight and the pizza delivery cart I'd brought for all those boxes and tried to shake off the weird feeling. A job is a job, and I needed that money. That's when I saw the string of lights leading into the mine shaft. Old-fashioned bulbs, the kind you'd see in a 1950s factory, stretching back into the darkness. They were actually working, somehow, even though this place hadn't had power in 70 years. I called out, "Pizza delivery," but my voice just seemed to get swallowed by the tunnel. The echo was wrong. Too short, like the sound was being absorbed by something soft. I loaded the pizzas onto my cart and started following those lights deeper into the mine. My flashlight beam showed support beams covered in carved symbols, triangles inside circles, spirals that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them, stick figures with too many arms and legs. The carvings looked fresh, but the wood was ancient. Nothing about this place made sense. The deeper I went, the more I could hear machinery running. Industrial sounds, pistons pumping, gears turning, metal on metal. But underneath that, something organic. Like breathing pipes, like lungs the size of buildings. The air got thicker with each step, and I started tasting copper on my tongue. Then I reached the main chamber, and I understood why they'd ordered 40 pizzas. It was a massive natural cavern, bigger than any cathedral, with mining equipment that looked like it had been fused with organic matter. Conveyor belts that pulsed like arteries, drill presses that breathed, pistons that pumped in rhythm with something that might have been a heartbeat. And working among all this impossible machinery were the miners. They were man-shaped, but wrong, stretched in all the wrong places, arms that bent in 3 places instead of 2, legs with extra knees. They moved like spiders, but with purpose, still wearing mining gear from different eras, some in 1950s coveralls, others in clothing that looked much older. Their skin was gray-white and semi-translucent. I could see black liquid pumping through their veins like oil through tubes. They were mining something that definitely wasn't copper. Green crystals that pulsed with their own light, each one about the size of a baseball. As I watched, they'd extract a crystal, hold it up to examine it, then place it carefully in wooden crates marked with symbols I didn't recognize. The foreman approached me then. His face was almost human, but the proportions were off, too wide, too flat. His name tag read Thompson, and when he spoke, his voice sounded like rocks grinding together. "Pizza's here, boys," he called out, and the other workers stopped what they were doing and gathered around. Thompson handed me exact change, the right amount down to the penny, including the tip. But when I looked at the bills, the serial numbers were wrong. Close to real money, but not quite right. I watched them eat, and that's when I knew I was in serious trouble. They didn't chew the pizza. They absorbed it through their palms, pressing slices against their hands until the cheese and sauce just disappeared into their skin. "Been working here since 1952, Thompson explained conversationally, like we were talking about the weather. "Mine never really closed, you see, just changed what we were digging for. Company still needs us, good benefits, never get tired, never get hungry, except for the monthly pizza, of course." He showed me one of the green crystals they'd been mining. Inside it, I could see movement, like watching a movie through green glass. People, places, events I didn't recognize, all perfectly preserved. "Time crystals," Thompson said. "Each one contains a moment. Trade them to the buyers from elsewhere. That's how we get supplies, pizza, tools, things we need to keep working." More workers were emerging from deeper shafts. Hundreds of them. I could see mining disasters from different decades, cave-ins, gas explosions, equipment failures. All of them transformed, but still working, still devoted to the job. The worst part was seeing the children. Child laborers from the 1800s, still child-sized but with ancient, knowing eyes. They watched me with curiosity, tilting their heads like birds. At the center of it all was what Thompson called the processor. Dozens of miners had been fused together into a living computer, their bodies merged but their faces still visible, still moving. Eyes tracking my movement, mouths opening and closing silently, calculating extraction rates and trade schedules with flesh that had become machinery. I started backing away, but the tunnels had changed. The entrance wasn't where I'd left it. Paths multiplied, leading deeper into the mountain. When I tried to run, they followed. Not aggressively, just persistently, calling after me. "Stay," they said. "Good job. Forever employment. Benefits include immortality." Every tunnel I took led further down. Going up somehow led down. My compass spun wildly. Physics had broken down here, along with everything else that made sense. I found older sections of the mine. Pre-colonial excavations where Native Americans had dug too deep and found the same thing these miners had found. The indigenous workers were still there too, barely humanoid anymore, more crystal than flesh. And at the very bottom, I found the source of it all. A crystalline entity the size of a building. That's what they were mining, pieces of this thing's body. It spoke through harmonics that made my teeth ache, offering me the same deal it had offered all the others. Leave, but bring pizza monthly, or stay forever and become part of the work crew. Then I realized something that made my blood go cold. The pizza orders went back decades. I'd seen the receipts, different delivery drivers, different years. But some of those receipts had my name on them, dated for years in the future. I'd been here before. I would be again. Already part of a cycle I was just now discovering. That's when I threw the remaining pizzas at the crystal entity. Tomato sauce hit it like acid, and it screamed, a sound that shook the entire mountain. The workers collapsed as their connections severed. Some crumbled to dust immediately. Thompson had one moment of clarity, became human again for just a second. "Run, kid," he gasped before his body turned to crystal. The entity retreated deeper, and its movement opened the original mine shaft. I could see stars outside, real sky. I ran like I've never run before, feeling two long arms reaching for me from the darkness behind. I burst out of the mine just as the entrance collapsed. Dawn was breaking. According to my watch, I'd only been gone 20 minutes, but I'd experienced hours underground. My car was covered in crystal dust that looked like glitter in the sunrise. When I got back to the store, Dave was furious about me being late, but the register had all the money. The right amount, somehow. Real bills this time, with correct serial numbers. The next month, another order came in. 40 pizzas to Copper Creek Mine. I refused to take it. The new driver who did take it came back different. Movements too smooth, joints that see, med too flexible. He quit the next day without explanation. I've done some research since then. Pizza orders to closed mines happen everywhere. It's a global network, feeding something that exists in the spaces between what we understand and what we don't. Sometimes I still cough up crystal dust. My doctor found microscopic crystals growing in my lungs, but he can't explain where they came from. Every October, I feel the pull toward the mountains, toward the mines. I know that eventually, whether I want to or not, I'll deliver to Copper Creek again. The receipts with my name are already printed, dated for years I haven't lived yet. I still work for Domino's, still need the money, but I don't take late-night deliveries anymore, especially not in October. And I've never told anyone about this until now. Looking back, I think that's what scares me the most. Not that it happened, but that somewhere in those tunnels, there's still a version of me that never left. Still delivering pizzas to workers who died decades ago in a mine that exists in the spaces between time. And every month, when that fax machine starts up at 11 p.m., I wonder if tonight's the night I finally complete the cycle. My name's Rosa, and I'm 44 years old. I run a small cleaning service here in West Virginia. Been doing it for about 8 years now. Started with just me and my old Honda, but I've got 5 employees now and 3 vans with the company logo. We mostly do regular houses, some offices, the occasional rental property between tenants. Good, honest work, and it pays the bills. My team knows I don't mess around with sketchy jobs. If something feels off about a client or a property, we just don't take it. That's always been my rule. Well, it was my rule until October 20th last year. The call came in around 3 p.m. on a Tuesday. I was at home doing paperwork when my phone rang. Number I didn't recognize, but I always answer during business hours. The voice was a woman's, sounded older, maybe in her 60s. She was polite but direct, said she needed emergency cleaning services for a property on Stillwater Ridge. That should have been my first red flag. My girls refuse to do mountain houses anymore. Too isolated, they say. Too many weird stories. But this woman was offering $5,000 cash for one night's work. $5,000. That's more than we usually make in a month. She said it had to be that night, before they returned. When I asked who they were, she just said the family would be back soon and the house needed to be perfect. Something about her voice made me not push for more details. Looking back now, I should have asked more questions. Should have hung up the phone. But $5,000 is $5,000, and my youngest was starting college in the spring. I told her I'd handle it personally. Didn't want to risk any of my girls on a mountain job that late. She gave me the address and said the door would be unlocked. Payment would be on the kitchen counter. The whole thing felt wrong, but I've cleaned plenty of weird situations before. Rich PEs. Opal have their quirks, you know? Sometimes they want their places cleaned at odd hours. Sometimes they're particular about strangers being around. I figured this was just another eccentric client with too much money. Stillwater Ridge is about an hour drive from my house, up winding mountain roads that get narrower the higher you go. I loaded my van with all the usual supplies: vacuum, mop, cleaning chemicals, trash bags, the works. Left around 6 p.m. to get there before dark, though the GPS kept losing signal once I got into the mountains. Had to stop twice to check the directions on my phone when I could get a bar or two. The house appeared suddenly around a bend in the road, and I had to pull over for a minute just to look at it. 3-story Victorian mansion, painted white with dark green trim, wraparound porch, tower windows, the whole thing. Perfectly maintained, like someone had just finished restoring it. Beautiful place, honestly, though something felt weird about seeing a house that nice way up there in the middle of nowhere. The landscaping was immaculate, too. Fresh flowers in the beds, grass cut short, not a leaf out of place. But here's the thing that bothered me right away. I'd driven past this spot before, maybe 6 months earlier when I was visiting my cousin who lives further up the ridge. I remembered thinking it was a nice flat area, good spot for a house. But there hadn't been a house there then. Just an empty lot with some old stone foundations, the kind you see all over these mountains, where places burned down decades ago. I sat in my van for a few minutes, engine running, trying to make sense of it. Maybe I was remembering wrong. Maybe the house had been there and I just hadn't noticed it. But the more I looked at it, the more certain I became that this was the same spot, and 6 months ago it had been empty. The woman on the phone had said it as an emergency, though, and I was already there. $5,000. I grabbed my supplies and walked up to the front door. She was right about it being unlocked. The door opened smooth and quiet, and I stepped into what looked like a time capsule from the 1970s. Shag carpeting, wood paneling, furniture that screamed disco era. Everything was clean and arranged perfectly, like someone had just finished setting up for a magazine photo shoot. Fresh flowers and vases throughout the front room, and they smelled like they'd been cut that morning. The whole place had this lived-in feeling, like a family had just stepped out for groceries and would be back any minute. The envelope was on the kitchen counter exactly where she'd said it would be. $100 bills, crisp and new. I counted them twice, then tucked the envelope into my jacket pocket. Whatever was going on here, at least the money was real. That's when I noticed the dust. Not regular dust, the gray stuff that settles on everything in empty houses. This was different, silver, almost metallic, and it seemed to shimmer when the light hit it right. It covered every surface but in patterns, like someone had arranged it deliberately. Swirls on the coffee table, straight lines across the mantelpiece, geometric shapes on the TV stand. Beautiful, actually, if dust can be beautiful. I started with the living room, figured I'd work my way through the downstairs first. But when I tried to vacuum, the weirdest thing happened. The dust moved away from the suction. Not blown away, but actually sliding across surfaces to avoid the vacuum head. I tried chasing it with the hose attachment, but it was like the dust could sense where I was going to clean next, and got out of the way. After 10 minutes of this, I turned off the vacuum and just watched. The dust slowly rearranged itself back into those same patterns, swirls, lines, shapes, like it had a memory of where it belonged. I've been cleaning houses for years, and dust is dust. It doesn't move on its own, and it sure doesn't organize itself. The photo was on the walls made things even stranger. Family pictures, all the same people, a man, woman, and 3 kids, but they were arranged weird. The family looked older in the pictures near the front door, then gradually younger as you moved through the house. Like someone had put them up backwards, aging in reverse. By the time I got to the hallway, the parents looked like teenagers and the kids were just babies. The smell hit me when I reached the staircase. Sulfur mixed with roses, like someone had lit matches in a perfume shop. It got stronger as I climbed, and by the time I reached the 2nd floor, it was so thick I could taste it. Chemical burn with sweet flower perfume, making my eyes water. The master bedroom door was open, and I could see the bed was unmade. The covers were thrown back like someone had just gotten up, and when I got closer, I could feel warmth coming from the sheets. The impression of 2 bodies was still there in the mattress, and I swear the sheets were moving slightly, like someone was breathing underneath them. But the room was empty. I checked the closet under the bed, even looked behind the curtains. Nobody there. The closet was packed with clothes from different decades, dresses from the 20s, suits from the 50s, bell-bottom jeans from the 70s. All the same sizes, like one person had lived through all those eras and kept every outfit. But they smelled like they'd been worn recently. Body heat, cologne, that warm scent clothes have when someone's just taken them off. I should have left then. Looking back now, every instinct was telling me to get out of that house. But I needed that money, and I kept telling myself there had to be logical explanations for everything I was seeing. Rich people collect vintage clothes. Old houses settle and creak. Dust patterns can look strange in certain light. The bathroom changed my mind, out logical explanations. The tub was full of black water. Not dirty water, not rusty water. Black water, thick as oil, but moving like liquid. And there was something underneath the surface. Something big enough to displace water when it moved, reaching up toward the surface with what looked almost like fingers. Almost human. But the proportions were wrong. I tried to drain the tub, pulled the plug, and listened for the gurgling sound water makes going down. Nothing. The water level didn't drop at all. If anything, it seemed to be rising, starting to spill over the edge onto the white tile floor. But when it hit the floor, it didn't spread like normal water. It moved with purpose, flowing toward me, following me as I backed out of the bathroom. The children's rooms were worse. 3 bedrooms, each one set up for a different aged kid. Toys everywhere, but they were moving on their own. Blocks stacking themselves into towers, teddy bears walking across the floor. Toy cars driving in circles, like invisible children were playing with them. I stood in the doorway of the first room and watched a stuffed elephant rock back and forth in a child-sized chair, its button eyes seeming to follow me. The nursery made me physically sick. Empty crib with mobile spinning slowly overhead, but I could hear a baby crying. Not from the crib, the sound was coming from inside the walls. Soft crying at first, then louder, then screaming like something was in pain. I put my hands over my ears, but the sound seemed to come from inside my head. By the time I made it back downstairs, I was shaking. The kitchen was active now. Stove burners lit with pots boiling, oven door open with something roasting inside. The whole room smelled like cooking meat, but when I looked in the oven, what I saw didn't make sense. A roast, perfectly browned, but it had too many bones. Bones that didn't belong to any animal I recognized, arranged in patterns that hurt to look at. The dining room table was set for 6 people, fresh food appearing on the plates as I watched. Mashed potatoes, greens, and beans, sliced meat that was still steaming. A family dinner materializing out of nothing, like someone was about to sit down and eat. That's when I heard the car in the driveway. I ran to the front window, but there was no vehicle outside. Just the sound of car doors slamming, footsteps on the porch, keys jingling. The front door opened and I heard voices. A man, woman, and children talking about their day. Normal family conversation, but I couldn't see anyone. Then they materialized, translucent at first, like heat waves, then more solid. The family from the photographs, dressed in 70s clothes, going about their evening routine. The father sat in his chair and opened a newspaper. The mother went to the kitchen to check on dinner. 3 kids ran upstairs, laughing and playing. They walked through me like I wasn't there. When the little girl ran past, I felt a cold that went straight through to my bones. They were going about their normal routine, but something was wrong with all of it. The father was reading a newspaper with tomorrow's date and headlines about deaths that hadn't happened yet. The mother was cooking dinner that was already cooked, going through the motions but not really doing anything. Then the mother saw me. She turned from the stove and smiled, looking right at me for the first time. "Oh, good," she said, her voice cheerful but hollow. "You're here to clean up after." "After what?" I asked. "After the murders, of course. Such a mess. Blood everywhere. We can never get it clean ourselves." That's when I realized they didn't know they were dead. They thought it was still October 20th, 1978, the night they died. They were stuck in a loop, playing out their last evening over and over, not understanding that 45 years had passed. A 4th figure appeared in the hallway, older than the other children, maybe 17 or 18, holding a kitchen knife covered in blood. The family couldn't see him, but he was watching them with empty eyes. He looked at me and spoke in a voice that sounded like it was coming from far away. "I kill them every night," he said. "They reset every morning. I've been doing this for 45 years and I can't stop." He was the eldest son, I realized, the one who'd murdered his family and somehow trapped them all in an endless loop of that night. He was cursed to repeat the crime over and over, and they were cursed to die and reset, never knowing what was happening to them. The house needed someone to clean the murder scene so it could reset properly and continue the cycle. That's why I was there. That's why they needed it done before the family returned. Because they returned every night at the same time, and if the scene wasn't clean, they couldn't reset. They'd be stuck in the moment of their deaths forever. The ghost mother was begging me with her eyes. Even though she couldn't remember what happened, some part of her understood that I was their only hope. I thought about my own family, imagined being trapped in that kind of eternal nightmare, and I agreed to help. The blood appeared as soon as I started cleaning. Fresh, warm, impossible amounts of it. More than 5 people could possibly hold, spreading across every surface, soaking into the carpet, pooling in corners. I cleaned and cleaned, but it kept coming. And as I worked, I found things that shouldn't exist. Body parts that didn't belong to human anatomy. Organs I couldn't identify. Bones that were the wrong shape. That's when I understood the truth. This family hadn't been human. They were something else, something that had been pretending to be human, replacing real families in the area. The eldest son had discovered what they really were and killed them to stop them from spreading. But even dead, their influence was growing. Every person who came to clean their house became infected, started changing, becoming like them. I could feel it starting in myself. Extra fingers growing from my hands, my spine extending, my skin taking on a gray, waxy texture. I was becoming something else, something wrong. I had to think fast. Grabbed all the cleaning chemicals from my van, bleach, ammonia, industrial degreasers, and poured them in a circle around myself. The chemical reaction created something that disrupted whatever supernatural force was in that house. The building started screaming, walls bleeding, floors buckling. The ghost family began dissolving, but they were thanking me with their eyes. Finally free after 45 years. The killer son was weeping with relief, his form becoming lighter until he faded away completely. The house folded in on itself like origami in reverse. I ran as fast as I could, barely making it to my van before the whole thing collapsed into nothing. When I looked back, there was just an empty lot with old stone foundations, the same empty lot I'd seen 6 months earlier. But the check was still real. $5,000 that cleared the bank the next day. The physical changes didn't go away, though. I still have that extra finger on my left hand, and my spine is 3 inches longer than it should be. Doctors can't explain it, and surgery hasn't helped. I found a support group online for people who've had similar experiences, others who cleaned the wrong houses and came away changed. We don't talk about it much in person, but we understand each other. I still run my cleaning service, but I stick to normal houses now. Though sometimes I'll be working and find that same silver dust shimmering and arranging itself in patterns. When that happens, I pack up and leave immediately, because I know they're still out there, still spreading, still looking for the next person to help them continue their cycle. I don't clean mountain houses anymore. My girls think it's because of insurance liability or something. I let them think that. It is better than telling them the truth about what's really up there in those empty lots, waiting for someone desperate enough to take a job that pays too well and asks too few questions. Some jobs just aren't worth the money, no matter how much they offer. The dollar store night shift. I'm 24 years old, and I work the late shift at the Dollar General in Coalwood, West Virginia. I know what you're thinking. Art degree, 3 jobs, still sending money home to help with mom's medical bills. Yeah, it's not exactly the life I planned, but sometimes you do what you have to do. Coalwood's one of those towns where the coal industry died, but the people stayed, and now we're all just trying to make ends meet however we can. The Dollar General sits right on Main Street where the old company store used to be, back when this was a real mining town. Most nights it's pretty quiet, just shift workers grabbing energy drinks and people picking up last-minute groceries. But October 30th last year, that was different. That was the night I learned why our store always has the highest sales in the district on Halloween Eve, and why nobody talks about working the night shift that particular day. My manager, Danny, had been acting weird all week. Usually he's pretty laid back, but he kept giving me these looks like he wanted to tell me something important but couldn't figure out how to say it. On the 30th, he left early, around 5:30, right before sunset. He handed me the keys and said, "You know what to do, Maria. Just serve them well, okay? They tip good." When I asked him what he meant, he just shook his head and walked out to his truck. I figured he was talking about the usual Halloween crowd, maybe some late shoppers grabbing candy for trick-or-treaters. The store had been dead all day anyway. I'd maybe seen 10 customers since my shift started at noon. I spent most of the afternoon restocking shelves and trying to study for my online marketing class, thinking it was going to be another boring evening. Then the sun went down and everything changed. At exactly 6 p.m., it was like someone flipped a switch. Suddenly, there were customers everywhere. Old folks, families, kids, all streaming through the front doors. The weird thing was, I hadn't seen any cars pull up in the parking lot. I kept glancing out the windows, but the lot was empty except for my beat-up Honda. Where were all these people coming from? And they were all dressed strangely. Not like Halloween costumes, but like they'd walked out of old photographs. The women wore long dresses with high collars. The men had suspenders and work shirts that looked hand-stitched. Some of the kids were barefoot despite the October cold, but what really got my attention was what they were buying. An elderly woman came up to the register with an oil lamp, not one of those decorative electric ones we sometimes carry, but an actual oil lamp with a glass chimney and metal base. When I scanned it, the register beeped like normal, even though I'd never seen that item in our inventory. She paid with a silver certificate from 1923, crisp like it had just been printed. I stared at it, thinking it had to be fake, but when I fed it into the register, it accepted it and gave her change in regular bills. That's when I started paying closer attention to the customers. The next guy bought a straight razor and shaving soap, items we definitely don't carry. He paid with Confederate money, actual Confederate bills that looked old but weren't falling apart. A woman with 3 small children bought washboards, lye soap, and cloth diapers, all things that showed up on my screen but weren't anywhere in the store. Every transaction went through normally, but nothing made sense. Around 7 p.m., an elderly woman approached my register with a bolt of fabric and some sewing notions. She had kind eyes and gray hair pinned up in a style I'd seen in old photos. When she smiled at me, I felt this weird recognition, like I'd seen her face before. Then it hit me. She looked exactly like the portrait hanging in the Coalwood Library, the one of Margaret Whitmore, the town's founder. The brass plaque said she'd died in 1889. I must have gone white as a sheet, because the woman, Margaret, reached across the counter and patted my hand. Her touch was cold but gentle. "First time working Halloween Eve, dear?" she asked in a voice that sounded like it came from far away. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "Don't be afraid. We've been shopping here for generations. Different stores, same spot. We only get one night a year." That's when I understood. Every single customer in my store was dead. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. More people kept coming in, miners with coal dust still on their faces, women in dresses from the 1940s, children who looked like they'd stepped out of daguerreotypes. They moved through the aisles like they belonged there, picking up items that shouldn't exist, chatting quietly among themselves about people and places I'd never heard of. The strangest part was how normal it all felt. They were polite, patient, and treated me like any other cashier they'd dealt with 100 times before. A little girl, maybe 8 years old, came up to the counter with an armload of penny candy. Her dress was patched and mended, and coal dust streaked her face. When I rang up her purchase, she paid with coins so old I couldn't read the dates. "I died in the mine collapse of 1902, she said matter-of-factly, like she was telling me her address. "Mama sent me to get sweets for my little brother. He's waiting outside." She pointed toward the window, and I saw a boy even smaller than her, translucent in the parking lot lights. Each customer had a story. The Civil War soldier buying ammunition told me about the letter he never got to send home. The woman in the 1950s dress buying baby clothes talked about the child she lost and was hoping to see again. An old miner purchasing work gloves said he wanted to help his grandson who'd taken over the family business. They weren't scary. They were just people who had unfinished business, things they needed to take care of, loved ones they were still looking after. Around 8 p.m. I found a leather ledger under the cash register. The pages were yellowed with age, and every October 30th going back to 1889 had an entry. Different stores, different names, but always the same location. And at the bottom of each year's page was a signature, the night shift cashier who'd served the dead. I flipped to the earliest entries and found a name that made my heart stop: Rosa Martinez, my great-great-grandmother. Below her signature, in her handwriting, "They mean no harm. Serve them well, for they remember kindness." The crowd kept growing. By 9 p.m., there had to be 200 people in my store, representing every era of Colwood's history. Civil War soldiers argued with Union miners about politics that had been settled for decades. Coal barons in expensive suits tried to cut in line, but the working class dead just laughed at them. "Death's the great equalizer," a miner told a fancy-dressed businessman. "Your money don't spend here." The saddest section was near the back, where people who'd taken their own lives gathered separately. They moved slower than the others, shopping for items that seemed to represent regret. Writing paper, photographs, small gifts they'd never given. A young man about my age was looking at rope, and something about his posture, the way he held himself, made me realize he wasn't dead yet. He was shopping for what he planned to use tomorrow. I broke protocol. I left my register and walked over to him. "Hey," I said gently, "you don't need that." He looked up, surprised, and I could see the pain in his eyes. "Whatever's wrong, it can get better. I know it doesn't feel like it, but it can." I don't know what made me say it, but I told him about his daughter. I'd seen her school pictures in the local paper. Honor roll student, look just like him. "She needs her dad," I said, "even if you don't think so right now." He put the rope down and started crying. As he did, some of the other customers began to flicker and fade. The woman behind him, Margaret Whitmore, nodded approvingly. "Saving a life changes everything, dear, but it means changes for us too." That's when Danny appeared. Not living Danny, but his grandfather's ghost. He explained that the store was built on what used to be the town's crossroads, a place where the living and dead could meet one night a year. If I prevented deaths, the dead could visit more often, maybe once a month instead of once a year. It was a trade. I'd become the permanent night guardian, helping both the living and the dead, and in return, they'd help me help others. I agreed. The tips they left were real, old coins and bills that somehow became legal tender when morning came. By dawn, I had enough money for Mom's experimental surgery, the one insurance wouldn't cover. The dead had been saving their gratitude for generations, waiting for someone in my family to need it. The last customer was a man in his 30s wearing work clothes from the 1990s. He looked familiar, and when he smiled, I saw my own face reflected in his features. "I'm your dad," he said simply. "I bought this for you before the accident, but I never got to give it to you." He handed me a small teddy bear, worn but loved. For just a moment, when he hugged me goodbye, I felt warmth and safety I'd never experienced before. These days, I work every October 30th night shift, and I've prevented 12 suicides in the past year. The town's death rate has dropped to almost nothing, though nobody can explain why. I started painting portraits of my customers, both living and dead, and the gallery show, Faces of Colwood, helped bring tourism back to our town. People say I have a gift for capturing souls in my artwork. If they only knew how literal that was. Mom's surgery was successful, and she never asked where the money came from. I've trained my younger cousin to take over even. Thule, keeping it in the family, just like the ledger showed. Some nights, even when it's not October 30th, I see my regular customers around town. We nod to each other, a quiet acknowledgement of the work we do together. I'm still a cashier at Dollar General, but now I serve two worlds. And honestly, every transaction saves someone. Back when I was 29, I ran a little food truck called Tony's Tacos. Nothing fancy, just me trying to make enough money to get through another winter. October was always the worst month for business. People starting to hunker down, fewer outdoor events, and the tourist season winding down here in the mountains. That's why when I got the call about the Mountain Harvest Festival on October 28th, I didn't ask too many questions. The guy on the phone said it was up in Whippoorwill Hollow, which I'd never heard of, but he gave me GPS coordinates and promised good money. Said there'd be thousands of people and I'd be one of only 6 food trucks. Honestly, I needed every dollar I could get. My daughter Emma was staying with her mom that weekend, so I figured why not drive up into the mountains and see what this festival was all about. The coordinates led me up a winding mountain road I'd never been on before, even though I'd been running the truck around these parts for 3 years. No street signs, just trees getting thicker and the air getting colder. My phone kept losing signal, but the GPS held steady until I turned into what looked like a clearing that opened up into this massive valley. There were already 5 other food trucks parked in a neat row, which should have made me feel better, but something was off. The drivers were all standing outside their trucks, perfectly still, smiling these wide smiles that didn't reach their eyes. When I waved, they waved back in perfect unison, like they'd practiced it. The festival setup was impressive, I'll give them that. A main stage with professional sound equipment, rows of vendor booths, even proper lighting strung between the trees. But the parking lot was completely empty, not a single car. I asked one of the other food truck guys, a tall, thin man with a hot dog cart, where all the customers were parking. He pointed toward the tree line and said, "They come from the forest." His voice sounded hollow, like he was talking through a pipe. Around sunset, people started emerging from between the trees. Hundreds of them, then thousands, all walking in the same slow, steady pace. Families with children, elderly couples, teenagers in groups. A normal festival crowd, except none of them had driven here. They just appeared from the woods like they lived out there. I didn't have time to think too hard about it because my first customers were already approaching the truck. A group of 4 adults ordered tacos and nachos, normal enough conversation. But when the woman handed me a $20 bill, her skin felt rough like tree bark. I looked closer and realized it wasn't just rough. It actually looked like bark, with deep grooves and patches of moss. I must have stared because she laughed and said, "First time at the Harvest Festival?" When I nodded, she winked. "You'll get used to us." The strangest thing happened when I opened the register. The 20 she'd given me had turned into acorns. Not fake acorns, real ones, still attached to little pieces of branch. I was about to call her back when I blinked and they were $20 bills again, complete with serial numbers and everything. I shook my head and figured I was more tired than I thought. The music started around 8 o'clock, and it was beautiful in a way that made my teeth ache. The band on the main stage was playing instruments I couldn't quite identify. They looked like fiddles and guitars, but seemed to be made from bones and antlers. The lead singer was a woman in a flowing dress, and when she opened her mouth to sing, no sound came from her lips. Instead, the melody poured from a hole in her chest, like her ribs were the sound box of a guitar. I could see right through her to the other side. The crowd swayed to the music, but not in time with the beat. They moved like trees in the wind, all together, following some rhythm I couldn't hear. I kept serving customers, trying not to stare too hard at the ones with bark skin. About every 3rd person had it, and they all ordered the same thing: meat, lots of meat. Most of them asked for it raw. That's when things got really weird. A man with bark covering half his face leaned into my serving window and said, "You got any of that special meat tonight?" He gave me a knowing wink like we'd talked about this before. I told him I didn't know what he meant, but when I turned around to check my freezer, there was a wrapped package I'd never seen before. No label, no price tag, just this bundle of meat that seemed to move slightly when I touched it. I should have thrown it away. Should have told the customer I was out of whatever he wanted. Instead, I found myself unwrapping it and tossing it on the grill. The moment it hit the hot surface, it let out a sound like a scream. Not sizzling, an actual scream. The entire crowd turned toward my truck and cheered like I'd just scored a touchdown. The line got longer after that. People who'd been eating regular food from my truck were coming back, but their skin was starting to change. Getting rougher, darker, developing those same bark-like grooves I'd seen on the others. I looked around at the other food trucks and realized they weren't serving normal food at all. The ice cream truck was handing out what looked like frozen clouds. The barbecue stand was serving condensed moonlight on paper plates. The hot dog cart was dispensing music, actual musical notes you could hold and eat. The festival coordinator showed up around 9, and he was at least 8 feet tall, wearing a suit that looked like it was stitched together from different kinds of leaves, constantly shifting and rustling. He showed me a contract with my signature on it, which was impossible because I'd never signed anything. According to the paper, I'd agreed to serve food until dawn. No exceptions, no early departures. I check. Had my phone for the time, and it still said October 28th, but the festival banner overhead read Harvest Festival 1887. As I watched, the numbers shifted and changed. 1923, 1956, 1978, 1995. Different decades, same date, same festival. That's when I noticed the food truck next to mine was an old-style cart from maybe the 1950s, complete with a driver in a period-appropriate uniform. But his beard had grown so long it was actually growing into the truck itself, weaving through the metal framework like roots. When he saw me staring, he called over, "Been here 43 years now, son. You get used to it." I tried to start my truck and leave, but the engine wouldn't turn over. Looking underneath, I could see roots growing from my tires into the ground, anchoring me in place. Thick brown roots that pulsed like veins. The crowd was getting hungrier and more aggressive. When I ran out of the special meat, they started shaking my truck, demanding more. The coordinator glided over and suggested I use myself, just a little. He held up his hand, showing me where 3 fingers were missing, then watched as they slowly regenerated. "Grows back," he said cheerfully. "Everyone contributes eventually." I watched the hot dog vendor slice a piece of meat from his own arm, grill it up, and serve it to a waiting customer. His arm healed completely in under a minute. The crowd loved it. I was exhausted, starving, and completely trapped. I actually picked up a knife and held it to my forearm, considering it. The crowd cheered louder, sensing I was about to give in. Then my phone rang. Emma's voice cut through everything like a knife through fog. "Daddy, are you okay? You sound different." Just hearing her voice reminded me why I was working these long hours, why I needed to get home, why I couldn't become whatever these people had become. The crowd heard her voice and stepped back. Some of the bark-skinned people started crying, like they suddenly remembered they had children too. The spell, or whatever it was, started breaking. People began snapping out of it all, over the festival. The bark was literally falling off their skin like dead leaves. Dozens of them were looking around confused, realizing they'd been trapped here for decades, some for centuries. The coordinator was getting frantic, his leaf suit rustling violently as he tried to maintain control. All the food truck operators stopped serving at once. Without the food, without people eating and transforming, the whole festival structure started falling apart. The sky above us cracked like glass, showing normal October night beyond. Stars, a real moon, the sound of distant traffic. Everyone started running for that crack in the sky, including me. The coordinator tried to stop us, growing into a massive tree that blocked the exit, its branches reaching out to grab people and drag them back. I grabbed the propane tank from my grill, turned it into a makeshift flamethrower, and set his tree form on fire. The screaming sound that came from the burning wood is something I still hear in nightmares. Hundreds of people escaped through that crack in reality. I saw folks in period clothing from different eras running alongside me, people who'd been trapped since their own decades, finally getting their chance to go home. My truck started up immediately once the roots released, and I drove straight through the crack as reality shattered around me like breaking glass. I emerged at Mountain View Park, the regular festival site where normal events happen. There were maybe 50 people there, a normal small-town festival crowd. Real cars in the parking lot, real food trucks serving real food. My phone said I'd only been gone 2 hours, even though I'd experienced a full night. Emma was still awake when I called her. My truck was damaged. Root marks scarred into the tires, bark fragments in the cash register, but those acorns had turned into real money. Hundreds of dollars, I definite. Eli hadn't earned through normal sales. I've met other food truck operators since then who remember that night, though most people seem to forget it happened. Every October 28th, I feel this pull toward the mountains, hear faint music on the wind, but I resist it. Now, I take Emma on vacation every year during that weekend, as far from the mountains as possible. There's still a patch of bark on my left shoulder that won't go away. Sometimes when I'm stressed, it spreads a little before shrinking back. My business has been strangely successful since that night, like the truck was blessed somehow or cursed, I'm not sure which. Customers are always drawn to it, even when there are other options nearby. I cook for humans now, only humans. But sometimes when I'm grilling late at night, I smell bark burning somewhere in the distance and know they're still out there, still celebrating their harvest festival, still waiting for next year's vendors to stumble into Whippoorwill Hollow and sign a contract they don't remember writing. Looking back now, I think the scariest part wasn't the supernatural stuff or even almost cutting myself up for the crowd. It was how easy it would have been to just accept it, to let the bark grow over my skin and spend eternity serving impossible food to people who weren't quite people anymore. If Emma hadn't called when she did, I might still be there, roots growing through my truck, serving special meat to a crowd that never goes home. I still don't talk about this much, and I've never told Emma the real reason we take those October vacations. But every year when the leaves start turning and the festivals start winding down, I remember the sound of that music made from bones, and I drive a little faster to get away from the mountains. I'm 52 years old, and I've been driving school buses for 15 years now. I know every kid on my routes, every parent, every stop, every pothole on these mountain roads. Been living up here in eastern Kentucky my whole life, and there ain't much that surprises me anymore. At least that's what I thought until October 16th of last year. I was working for the county school district, had been on the same routes for years. Kids knew me, I knew them. It was good work, steady pay, summers off, and I genuinely liked helping get these mountain kids to school safely. Some of them ride the bus for over an hour each way, coming from way back in the hollers where the roads are barely wide enough for my bus. That morning started like any other. Got to the depot at 4:30 a.m., did my pre-trip inspection, checked the oil and tires. Sandra, our dispatcher, called me over to her window just as I was getting ready to head out. "Carl, I need you to cover Route 77 today," she said, not looking up from her clipboard. "Jimmy's out sick." I'd never heard of Route 77. Been driving for the district 15 years, knew every route number by heart. "Route 77, where's that run to?" Sandra finally looked up, and I swear there was something weird in her expression, like she was uncomfortable. "Burnt Church Road area. Here's the route map." She handed me a piece of paper that looked like it had been copied 100 times. The writing was faded, and the paper felt old, like it had been sitting in a file cabinet for decades. I looked at the route, and none of it made sense. The stops were all along Burnt Church Road, but I knew that area. Nothing but forest out there. No houses, no driveways, nothing. I started to ask Sandra about it, but when I looked up, she'd already turned away and was talking to another driver. The other drivers had gone quiet too. Old-timers like Bobby and Frank who'd been driving these mountains longer than I had. They just stared at their coffee cups when I asked if anyone knew about Route 77. Bobby finally mumbled something about how some routes just had to be covered and walked away. Looking back now, I should have pressed harder for answers. Should have demanded to know what was really going on. But I needed the overtime pay. My granddaughter was starting college that fall, and every extra dollar helped. So at 5:15 a.m., I fired up Bus 23 and headed toward Burnt Church Road with that strange old route map taped to my dashboard. The morning was cold for October, maybe in the low 40s, with a thick fog hanging in the valleys. Perfect weather for keeping kids bundled up and quiet on the bus. The first stop was listed as 5:47 a.m., corner of Burnt Church Road and Mill Creek. I knew the intersection, just a gravel road that dead-ended into forest about a quarter mile up. No houses, no mailboxes, nothing. But the route map was clear, so I drove out there anyway, figuring I'd radio Sandra when nobody showed up. I pulled up to the intersection right at 5:47. Opened the doors out of habit, expecting empty road and silent woods. Instead, there was a little boy standing there, maybe 7 years old, wearing clothes that looked like they came from an old photograph. Wool pants held up with suspenders, a white button-down shirt, and leather shoes that had seen better days. His hair was combed neat and parted to the side. The kid was just standing there in the fog, not moving, not shivering despite the cold. When the door opened, he climbed up the steps without a word. His skin was ice cold when he brushed past me, and I noticed he didn't make any sound when he walked. No footsteps, no rustling clothes. "Morning," I said, trying to be friendly. "You must be new to the route." The boy didn't answer, just walked to the back of the bus and sat down. One in the last seat, staring out the window with this longing expression, like he was looking for something he'd lost. I radioed Sandra. "Dispatch, this is bus 23. I've got the first pickup. On Route 77, but I need to verify the address. Kid says he lives on Burnt Church Road, but I don't see any houses." Static, complete radio silence. I tried again. "Sandra, you copy? This is Carl on bus 23. Nothing. I checked my phone. No signal. That wasn't unusual up in these mountains, but the timing felt wrong. The next stop was listed 10 minutes up the road. When I got there, another impossible location, just a gap in the trees. Another child was waiting. This one was a girl, maybe 10 years old, wearing a dress that looked like it came from the 1970s. Same cold skin, same silent climb onto the bus, same empty stare out the window. Then another stop, another child, a boy in clothes from maybe the 1930s. Then a girl in what looked like pilgrim dress, old enough it could have come from the 1800s. By the time I'd made 6 stops, I had 7 children on my bus, all from different time periods, all sitting quietly and staring out the windows. None of them talked to each other. None of them seemed to breathe. I kept checking the windows for fog from their breath, but the glass stayed clear despite the cold morning air. That's when I recognized one of them. There's a memorial wall in the district office with photos of students who died over the years. Car accidents, illnesses, a few tragedies that happened back in the 60s and 70s. One of the boys on my bus looked exactly like a photo I'd seen on that wall. A kid named Tommy Morrison who died in 1963 when he fell through ice on Miller's Pond. I pulled the bus over and turned around in my seat. "Hey kids, where exactly are you all going to school?" 7 voices answered in perfect unison. "We're going to school. We missed school." The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I tried the radio again. Dead. Phone still had no signal. The fog outside was getting thicker, and I couldn't see the road behind us any more. One of the smaller girls, the one in the 1970s dress, started crying. Not loud, just tears running down her cheeks. "I forgot my lunch," she whispered. "Mama packed me a lunch and I forgot it." Something about the way she said it broke my heart. I reached into my lunch bag and pulled out the ham sandwich my wife had made me. "Here, honey, you can have mine." The little girl took the sandwich with hands that felt like ice cubes. When she bit into it, I swear I saw color come back into her face, just a little. She chewed slowly, like she was remembering something important. "I remember eating," she whispered. That's when the other kids started looking at me, really looking, for the first time. The longing in their eyes was overwhelming. "Are you hungry too?" I asked. They all nodded. I shared everything I had. My coffee, the donuts my wife had packed, even the apple I was saving for lunch. As each child ate, they seemed to become more real, more present. Their skin warmed up slightly, and they started to talk. That's when I learned the truth about Route 77. The boy in the 1930s clothes died walking to school in 1934 during the worst blizzard anyone could remember. He'd walked 7 miles through the snow and froze to death just 100 yards from the schoolhouse. The girl in the pilgrim dress died in 1888 trying to reach the settlement school. Her family lived so far back in the mountains that it took her 2 days to walk to town. She got lost in the woods and starved. 3 of the children died in a school fire in 1921. They'd made it to school that day but never made it out. Tommy Morrison, the boy I recognized, had been walking across Miller's Pond to take a shortcut to school when the ice gave way. He drowned in 8 feet of freezing water. The little girl with the lunch died in 1974 when a drunk driver hit the school bus she was riding. She was the only fatality. The newest ghost was the most heartbreaking. A boy who looked maybe 12, wearing clothes from just last year. He told me he'd been walking to catch the bus when a car hit him and drove off. The driver was never caught. I remembered that story from the local news. Happened right here on Burnt Church Road. "We just want to go to school," the 1930s boy said. "Just once. We want to finally get there." "Where is your school?" I asked. They all pointed up the road toward where I knew nothing but an empty lot existed. The original settlement school had been torn down in the 1960s. "It's right there," the little girl said. "Can't you see it?" I looked where they were pointing and saw nothing but fog and trees. But these children had been trying to reach school for decades, some for over a century. They'd died trying to get an education, something most kids today take for granted. I made a decision that probably saved my life, though I didn't know it at the time. "All right," I said. "Let's go to school." I put the bus in drive and headed toward the empty lot where the old school had stood. As we got closer, something impossible started to happen. Through the fog, I could see the outline of a building, an old 2-story schoolhouse with a bell tower and wooden steps leading up to the front door. The building became more solid as we approached, until it looked completely real. Not only that, but I could see other buses parked around it. Old buses from different eras, a 1940s model, a 1960s model, even what looked like a horse-drawn wagon. Ghost teachers stood on the front steps, welcoming the children. And standing right in the middle of them was Mrs. Patterson, my 2nd-grade teacher who died in a car accident when I was 8 years old. She waved at me. The clock on my dashboard stopped. The world outside the bus went completely silent. No wind, no birds, nothing. It felt like we'd driven into a pocket of time that existed outside the normal world. Through the school windows, I could see children sitting in classrooms, finally getting the educate. And they died trying to receive. They were learning, growing, completing something that had been left unfinished. I felt a pull, like invisible hands trying to drag me out of my seat toward the school. Part of me wanted to go. Mrs. Patterson was there, and some of the other teachers I remembered from my childhood. It would be easy to just park the bus and walk inside. But then I saw the picture of my grandkids that I keep clipped to my sun visor. Their faces reminded me that I belonged to the world of the living, not this place where time stood still. I gripped the steering wheel and fought against the pull. That's when the school bell rang. The sound echoed across the impossible landscape, and something amazing happened. The children I'd brought to school started aging rapidly. I watched them grow from kids to teenagers to young adults to the ages they would have been if they'd lived full lives. They walked out of the school as grown-ups, turning to wave at me before disappearing into a bright light that hurt my eyes. One by one, all the ghost buses faded away. The school became transparent, then vanished completely. The only child left was the boy who died last year in the hit and run. He walked up to the front of the bus and whispered a name and a license plate number in my ear. Information that only the victim would know. Then he was gone too. I found myself sitting alone in my bus in an empty lot with normal morning sunlight streaming through the windows. My radio crackled to life. "Bus 23, this is dispatch. What's your location?" I looked at my watch. It was 6:15 a.m. According to the impossible trip I'd just taken, I should have been driving that route for over 2 hours. But only 28 minutes had passed since I'd left the depot. When I got back to the bus yard, I told Sandra what happened. She went pale and took me to see the supervisor. Turns out, the bus camera had recorded everything. The footage showed me talking to empty air, sharing my food with nobody, driving to an empty lot where the camera clearly showed a full schoolhouse. That shouldn't exist. They canceled Route 77 immediately, told me to never talk about it with the other drivers, but they let me keep the hand-drawn route map. I called in an anonymous tip to the police about the hit and run, giving them the name and license plate the ghost boy had whispered to me. They arrested the driver 3 days later. The evidence was overwhelming once they knew where to look. That night, I saw the boy standing at the foot of my bed. He mouthed, "Thank you," and faded away. Now, every October 16th, I take my personal car and drive Route 77. Sometimes there are new ghost children waiting, kids who died during the year trying to get to school. I've driven that route 5 times now, and each time I've been able to help a few more souls find peace. The living kids on my regular routes seem to sense something different about me. They're calmer, more respectful. Parents tell me their children feel safe on my bus. In 15 years of driving, I've never had a single accident. I think the ghost children I helped are watching over us. I should have retired last year, but I can't. Someone has to drive Route 77, and not everyone can see the dead. It's become a sacred duty. I'm training a younger driver now, someone who has the gift. The mountains choose their own guardians. I drive the living to school every day, and the dead to peace once a year. Both deserve to arrive safely. I'm 34 years old, and I work as a night stalker at a Walmart in West Virginia. Not exactly the career I had planned, but after my divorce, I needed something that paid steady and had health insurance for when I got to see my daughter on weekends. The Devil's Ridge location was the only place hiring full-time third shift, and honestly, I didn't mind working alone. Less drama, less small talk, just me and the shelves until dawn. The store sits about 15 miles outside of town, right where the old mountain highway curves past what used to be a bigger community back in the day. Most of the houses are empty now, just foundations and overgrown lots where families used to live. My supervisor, Janet, mentioned during training that the Walmart was built on the site of an old grocery store that burned down in the 70s, but I didn't think much about it. Half the businesses around here are built on top of something that came before. I'd been working there about 6 months when October rolled around. The job was fine. Boring, but fine. I'd come in at 10 p.m., unload the truck, stock the shelves, and head home by 7 a.m. Simple routine. The pay was enough to cover my child support and rent, which was all I really needed. My custody hearing was coming up in a few weeks, and my lawyer said having a steady employment record would help my case. October 19th started like any other night. I clocked in, grabbed my box cutter and scanning gun, and headed to the grocery section. The store was supposed to be closed, but sometimes the automatic doors would stick open, and we'd get the occasional drunk wandering in looking for cigarettes. That night felt different, though. The air conditioning was running hard, but I could see my breath in the cereal aisle. I figured the HVAC system was acting up again. This store had problems. The freezer section thermostats were always broken. The PASN system would crackle on by itself, and the security cameras showed weird angles sometimes. Janet called it old building syndrome, but the store was only about 10 years old. Still, I needed this job, so I didn't complain. Around 2 a.m., I was stocking boxes of Cheerios when I noticed something odd. The security monitor by the pharmacy showed 47 customers shopping throughout the store. Problem was, I'd been walking these aisles for 4 hours, and I hadn't seen a single person. I called up to the manager's office on the radio. "Hey Janet, the cameras are showing customers, but the store's empty." Her voice crackled back through the static. "Cameras always glitch in October, Tommy. Don't worry about it." I kept working, but the cold was getting worse. Ice was actually forming on my eyebrows, and my hands were going numb even through my work gloves. The thermostat in the break room read 72 degrees, but I was shivering like I was standing in a freezer. I went to grab a coffee to warm up, and that's when I noticed the products. I'd been stocking modern Kellogg's boxes, but when I turned around, the shelf was full of cereal brands I'd never seen before. Freakies, Sir Grapefellow, Count Chocula, but the old-style box design from when my dad was a kid. I pulled out my phone to take a picture. Maybe corporate would want to know about expired inventory. But the boxes flickered. 1 second they were there, the next second they were regular Cheerios again. The PA system crackled to life. Price check on aisle 7. Nobody was manning the registers. I was the only person in the store, but I recognized the voice asking for the price check. It was my own voice. I checked my phone. 2:17 a.m. I kept working, moving through the aisles, replacing products, organizing shelves. An hour later, I checked again. 2:17 a.m. The clock on the wall said the same thing. My Fitbit showed I'd walk. 23 miles, but I'd been working the same 3 aisles all night. That's when I saw her. An old woman pushing a shopping cart, wearing a polyester dress and platform shoes like something from a disco movie. Her cart was full of products I didn't recognize, canned goods with labels I'd never seen, boxes of crackers in packaging that looked decades old. She moved slowly down the aisle, studying prices, comparing items like any normal customer, except the store was closed and locked, and I was supposed to be alone. I walked over to her, my heart pounding. "Ma'am, the store is closed. You need to leave." She turned to look at me, and her eyes were completely white. Not blind white, empty white, like looking into fog. "Tommy," she said, and her voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. "Your father still owes me $17.43 from 1973. My father died when I was 5 years old. I'd never seen this woman before in my life. Before I could respond, she disappeared, just vanished, along with her cart. But the cold spot where she'd been standing was so intense that frost formed on the floor tiles. I pulled out my phone to call 911, but there was no signal. The landline in the manager's office was dead too. I tried the front doors. They wouldn't budge. The emergency exits were locked from the outside somehow. I was trapped. More customers started appearing. Men in brown suits and wide ties, women with feathered hair and bell-bottom jeans. All of them shopping, all of them moving with that same underwater slowness. Their skin looked wrong, too pale, too translucent, like I could see shadows moving underneath. Some of them had burn marks. I backed against the wall, trying to stay calm, trying to think logically. There had to be an explanation. Gas leak causing hallucinations, carbon monoxide, food poisoning, anything but what I was actually seeing. One of the burned customers approached my section. He was holding a can of soup, but the can kept changing, from Campbell's to some brand called Hillside and back again. He looked at me with those same empty wolves, height eyes. "Do you work here?" he asked. "The store is closed," I managed to say. "We've been shopping here since 1973, he replied. "We never got to finish checking out." That's when Janet appeared beside me, except Janet looked different, older. Her skin had a gray tint, and when she smiled, her teeth were black. "Tommy," she said, "I need to tell you something about this store." "Janet, what's happening? Who are these people?" "This Walmart was built on the site of Hillside Grocery, burned down October 19th, 1973. 17 people died in that fire." I stared at her. "You said the cameras glitch in October." "They don't glitch, Tommy. They show what's always been here." The customers kept shopping, moving through aisles that seemed to stretch longer than they should. Every product I touched aged decades in my hands. Milk cartons yellowed and expired. Bread molded instantly. Cans rusted and swelled. "Why can I see them?" Janet's gray face shifted into something that might have been sympathy. "Because you needed this job so badly that you were willing to work any shift, any place. The desperate always see the dead eventually. That's why I hired you." I looked around at the burned customers, still shopping, still picking items off shelves that flickered between modern products and things from 50 years ago. They were trapped here, replaying the same night over and over. "I need to leave," I said. "You can't leave," Janet replied. "Not until someone pays the debt." What debt? One of the customers, an old man with half his face burned away, wheeled his cart over to us. Your father was here that night, he said. October 19th, 1973. He saw the fire start in the stockroom. He ran, left us all to burn. I felt the air get even colder. That's impossible. My dad was from Ohio. Was he? The burned man reached into his cart and pulled out a yellowed newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Local grocery store, fire kills 17." Below it was a grainy photo of the scene, and in the background, running away from the building, was a young man who looked exactly like my father. He got out, the man continued. But he never warned anyone, never pulled the alarm, just saved himself. Janet nodded. That's why you're here, Tommy. The family owes a debt. Someone has to stay and help them finish their shopping. The burned customers were lining up now, all of them pushing carts full of impossible products toward a checkout station that flickered in and out of existence. They wanted me to ring them up, to help them complete the transaction they'd been trying to finish for 50 years. I looked at my phone. My daughter's picture smiled back at me from the lock screen. If I stayed here, if I helped these people, what would happen to her? Would she grow up without a father just like I did? But if I didn't help them, they'd be trapped forever. The smell of smoke was getting stronger. In the distance, I could see orange flames spreading along the walls, but they were wrong somehow, flickering like an old movie, like they were playing on a loop. One of the burned customers grabbed my arm. Her touch was ice cold, but her eyes were desperate, not angry. Please, she whispered. We just want to go home. I looked at her cart. It was full of birthday cake ingredients, party hats, candles. It was someone's birthday, I said. My granddaughter's 5th birthday, she replied. I never got to give her the party. That's when I realized who she was. I'd seen her face in an old photo at my dad's house. My grandmother, who died before I was born, who my father never talked about. Grandma? She nodded, tears streaming down her burned face. Tommy, you weren't supposed to work here, but now that you're here, you can help us finish what we started. I looked around at all the trapped souls, still shopping, still trying to complete their errands from 50 years ago. They weren't evil. They were just lost. What do I need to do? My grandmother P. pointed toward the back of the store where a fire alarm hung on the wall. Except it wasn't the modern Walmart alarm. It was an old-fashioned pull lever from the 1970s. Pull the alarm, she said. Warn everyone. Do what your father should have done. I ran toward the alarm, but Janet blocked my path. Her gray face twisted into something monstrous. You can't, she snarled. If they escape, who will work the night shift? Who will stock the shelves? I will, I said. But they deserve to go home. I pushed past her and grabbed the alarm lever. The moment I touched it, my hand burned like ice, but I held on. I pulled down as hard as I could. The alarm was deafening, a sound that seemed to come from 50 years in the past. The burned customers stopped shopping and looked up, confusion on their faces. Fire, I shouted. Everyone out! There's a fire! They started running then, pushing their carts toward exits that suddenly appeared, doors that led not to the parking lot, but to somewhere else, somewhere peaceful. As each customer passed through, they turned back to look at me. Thank you, they whispered. My grandmother was the last to leave. She pressed something into my hand, a small photo of a little girl blowing out birthday candles. Take care of your daughter, she said. The debt is paid. The fire was spreading faster now, the modern Walmart flickering and overlapping with the old grocery store. I could feel the heat on my face, smell the smoke filling my lungs. The building was collapsing around me, reality tearing apart. I ran for the loading dock, following the exit signs that kept changing from new to old and back again. The door was heavy, stuck, but I threw my shoulder against it and stumbled out into the parking lot. Dawn was breaking over the mountains. The store behind me looked normal again. Modern Walmart, no smoke, no fire. But I was covered in ash and my clothes were singed. The morning shift manager found me passed out in my truck an hour later. When I tried to explain what happened, he just looked at me like I was crazy. The security cameras showed nothing unusual from the night before, just me, alone, stocking shelves normally. But my time card showed something impossible. I'd worked 47 hours in a single 8-hour shift. 2 weeks later, I got my paycheck. Along with my regular pay, there was an adjustment for overtime, exactly $17.43, adjusted for inflation. In my locker, I found a note written in my grandmother's handwriting. Debt paid, family free, raise your daughter right. The night manager position was eliminated the next month. Corporate said they were moving to a day stocking model. I got transferred to a different store, 40 miles away from Devil's Ridge. The custody hearing went better than expected. The judge said something about family redemption and awarded me joint custody. I never work October nights anymore. Always request vacation, take my daughter camping, stay as far away from retail stores as possible during that time of year. But sometimes, when I drive past the old Devil's Ridge Walmart, I see lights flickering in the windows after closing time, shapes moving through the aisles, customers shopping for things they'll never need. The difference is, now I know, they have a choice. I still work the night shift at the new store, but it's just me and the shelves and the quiet. Normal night shift work, the way it should be. Sometimes I think about those 17 people and I hope they found their way home. I hope my grandmother got to give her granddaughter that birthday party, wherever they are now. My daughter sees things sometimes, shadows that shouldn't be there, people who aren't quite right, but they don't bother her. I think my grandmother is still watching out for our family, making sure the debt stays paid. I stock shelves at a different Walmart now, but I saved 17 souls by staying that night, and my daughter will never owe that debt. Back when I was 28, I was driving Uber nights to keep my lights on. My daughter Emma stayed with my mom during my shifts, and I was 3 months behind on rent, car payments, everything. I'd dropped out of nursing school when her father left, and honestly, I was drowning. Most nights I'd drive until 4 a.m., picking up drunks and shift workers, making maybe $60 if I was lucky. October 23rd changed everything. The ping came through at 12:47 a.m., $500 ride to some place called Sawmill Hollow, 73 miles into the mountains. 5-star passenger, payment already processed. I should have known something was wrong. Nobody pays $500 for an Uber ride, not around here. But Emma needed new winter clothes, and I was behind on everything. Desperation makes you stupid. The pickup address was 45 Maple Street, but when I got there, that house didn't exist. The numbers went 44, 46, nothing in between. I was sitting there checking my GPS when she appeared. Just stepped out from between two houses like she'd been waiting in the shadows. Wedding dress, full formal thing with a train that dragged on the ground. Carrying this ancient suitcase that looked like it belonged in a funeral home. The smell hit me first when she got in the car. Not flowers, like I thought initially. Decay masked with perfume. Sweet and rotten at the same time. Temperature dropped so fast my breath started fogging, and every light on my dashboard started flickering. "Thank you for waiting," she whispered. Her voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. "I'm late for my reception, 50 years late." I tried to be professional, asked about the destination, but my GPS kept glitching. The screen would show the route, then go black, then show what looked like hand-drawn maps from decades ago. She gave me directions instead, said to take the old mountain road. Her fingernails were black, I noticed, like she'd clawed her way out of dirt. The road changed without warning. One second I'm on asphalt, next second I'm driving on gravel that looks like it hasn't been maintained since the 1970s. My radio started picking up broadcasts about Vietnam and Watergate, but they sounded current, like breaking news. When I looked in my rearview mirror, she was holding a wedding invitation dated October 23rd, 1973. "Same night as tonight," she said, even though my phone clearly showed 2023. Except I never made it to the reception. That's when she told me about the accident. How she died on this road 50 years ago, car sliding off into the ravine during a storm. how she'd been trying to complete the journey every year since, but no driver had ever been brave enough to finish the ride. Most abandoned her at the first sign of trouble. "The others are waiting," she said, and when I looked back, my car was full of people in formal wear from different decades. A man in a powder blue tuxedo from the 1980s, his neck bent at an impossible angle. A woman in a 1960s bridesmaid dress, her face caved in on one side. All of them staring at me with black eyes that reflected my headlights. They'd all died trying to reach the same reception hall, she explained, all on October 23rd, different years. The hall was built on Cherokee burial ground, and the mountain demanded payment. One death every year to keep the old agreements intact. "Your grandfather," the bride said, and suddenly I remembered. Mom's stories about Grandpa dying in a car wreck up here in 1987, coming back from a wedding. That's why you got the call. Blood debt runs in families. The road kept degrading, asphalt becoming dirt, becoming something that looked older than roads should be. My car started failing piece by piece, engine overheating, brakes grinding, electrical system going haywire. But every time something broke, one of the dead passengers would touch it and it would work again, held together by their collective will. The mountain fought us. Trees crashed down, forcing me to swerve around trunks that hadn't been there seconds before. The ground split open in jagged lines that my headlights couldn't penetrate. Rain started falling upward, defying gravity, and I could hear voices in the wind. Cherokee words I somehow understood, telling us to turn back. But we couldn't turn back. The road behind us had vanished. Half a mile from the reception hall, my car died completely. Not just out of gas. Everything stopped working. The engine seized, the lights went out, even my phone died. Through the windshield, I could see the hall blazing with warm light, hear music from the 1970s drifting through the rain. All the dead passengers got out and started pushing, their formal wear hanging in tatters, their faces showing how they'd died. We could see the reception through the windows, hundreds of people dancing, celebrating, completely unaware that their guests of honor had been dead for decades. A groom in a brown suit paced by the entrance, checking his watch, still waiting for his bride. But there was something blocking us about 100 feet from the entrance, an invisible barrier that felt like ice and electricity when we hit it, the mountain's final defense. That's when the bride looked at me with those black hollow eyes and said, "It needs life force to break through. Young life. Your life." I thought about Emma, about how she'd grow up without me. But then I thought about these people, trapped for decades, and about how many more would die on this road if the curse continued. 5 years of my life seemed like a reasonable trade. The moment I agreed, I felt those years drain out of me like blood from a wound. My hair went gray at the temples, lines carved themselves around my eyes, and my bones started aching like an old woman's. But we broke through that barrier with a sound like the world splitting apart. The reception doors opened, and the groom ran to embrace his bride. They walked inside together, finally united after 50 years. One by one, all the other dead passengers followed, finding their own loved ones waiting. The music swelled, and for a moment it felt like a real celebration. But then the music stopped. The lights went out. And when I looked through those windows again, all I saw were skeletons in rotted formal wear, dancing with other skeletons in a hall filled with cobwebs and decay. The bride turned back to look at me one last time, and her face was just skull and empty sockets. "Thank you," she mouthed, and then everything went black. I woke up back on the highway 5 minutes after I'd picked her up. My car was running fine, gas tank full like nothing had happened. But I could feel those 5 lost years in my joints, see them in my reflection. And on my passenger seat was a wedding ring, tarnished black, with an inscription I couldn't quite read in the darkness. The $500 was still in my account. Blood money, I guess. I never went back to that road, and I stopped driving Uber after that night. Got a day job at a diner, started saving every penny to get back to nursing school. Emma asks sometimes why Mommy looks older, why I wake up screaming some nights. I tell her I had a bad dream, but dreams don't leave you with gray hair and arthritic hands at 28. The local news ran a story a few weeks later about a dramatic drop in accidents on the mountain roads. 0 fatalities, for the first time in decades, they said. They called it a statistical anomaly. But I know better. Some debts get paid and some curses get fed. The mountain got what it wanted that night. Not my life, but years of it. Enough to satisfy whatever old agreement was made when white folks first started building on sacred ground. I still have that ring. I wear it sometimes when the arthritis gets bad, and I need to remember that some prices are worth paying. Emma will grow up in a world where that particular stretch of road doesn't claim a life every October 23rd. That has to count for something, even if I'll never know for sure whether I saved those people or just fed something ancient and hungry that's still waiting in those mountains for the next desperate fool with Cherokee blood to take a ride they can't afford to refuse. I was 38 when I took the night janitor job at Mountain View Middle School, deep in the Kentucky mountains. 2 jobs, sending every penny back to Mexico for my daughter Elena's surgery. Days doing construction, nights mopping floors. Honest work in a place where honest work pays better than back home if you don't mind the isolation. October in these mountains feels different than anywhere else. The air gets thick, like something's pressing down on you from those ancient ridges. Old-timers say October's when the veil gets thin, when things that should stay buried start walking around. I never believed that until October 24th. Tommy, the other janitor, called in sick. Flu, he said, but his voice sounded strange on the phone, scared almost. Left me alone in that massive building. 3 floors, 42 classrooms, built in 1928 when coal money still flowed through these mountains like water. I started my rounds at 10 p.m., same as always. The building felt different, empty, older somehow. My footsteps echoed wrong in the hallways, like the sound was bouncing off surfaces that weren't there. But I needed the overtime. Elena's surgery couldn't wait. Room 3A stopped me cold. It was already clean. Not just tidy, perfect. Desks arranged in military precision, chalkboard wiped spotless, even the pencil shavings swept up. But according to my schedule, nobody had touched that room. The smell hit me next. Old chalk dust, thick and powdery, the kind they stopped making decades ago. And something else underneath. That musty, stale smell of a room that's been closed up too long. On the chalkboard, someone had written in perfect cursive, "Coal mining safety, October 24th, 1932. The handwriting was so precise it looked mechanical, like no human hand had formed those letters. I grabbed my eraser and wiped it clean. The chalk came off easy enough, but when I turned around to get my shoes, peep-lies, the writing was back. Different lesson this time. Surviving cave-ins, when the mountain claims you. My hands started shaking. I erased it again, this time scrubbing until my arm ached. But the moment I looked away, new words appeared. Recognizing black lung before it's too late. Every classroom on that floor was the same. Perfectly clean, lessons about death written on every board. Room 3B, Cherokee removal, final moments. Room 3C, mine disaster protocols, body recovery. Room 3D, typhoid symptoms, terminal stage. That's when I heard the children. Soft voices, reciting lessons in unison. The sound seemed to drift from the far end of the hall, room 3F. I followed it, my footsteps echoing strangely, like they were being answered by other footsteps just slightly out of sync. The door to 3F stood slightly open. The voices were clearer now, 30 or more children speaking together. When the fever reaches 104 degrees, delirium sets in. When the spots appear on the chest, death follows within hours. When the school bell rings 3 times, it means another child has passed. I pushed the door open. The room was empty, but shadows fell across every desk from the parking lot lights. Except these shadows had shape, substance. Children sitting perfectly still, all facing forward, all reciting their lesson about dying. I could only see them clearly when I wasn't looking directly. The moment I focused on a desk, it was empty. But in my peripheral vision, they were there. 30 shadow children, some slumped over their desks, others sitting unnaturally straight. One turned to look at me, A girl, maybe 10 years old, her shadow face gaunt and hollow. She pointed toward the garbage can in the corner. I'd emptied it an hour ago, but now it overflowed with items that shouldn't exist. Metal lunch pails with names etched deep. Mary Whitman, 1932. James Cooper, 1, 932. Sarah Mills, 1932. A newspaper, brown and brittle, headline reading, 28 children dead. School closes indefinitely. Slices of bread so moldy they crumbled to ash when I touched them. You can see us. I spun around. An elderly woman stood in the doorway, but she wasn't solid. I could see through her to the hallway beyond, like looking through dirty water. She wore a long dress from the 1930s, and her face, God, her face was wrong. Too pale, too sunken. Like someone had tried to recreate a human face from memory and gotten the proportions off. "I'm Miss Warren," she said, her voice echoing from somewhere behind her instead of from her mouth. "I was principal when they died, all of them, right here in these classrooms." The shadow children turned to look at me now, all of them, their hollow faces tilting in unison. And I realized they weren't just shadows. They were holes in reality, child-shaped absences where life used to be. "The typhoid came in October," Miss Warren continued, drifting closer. "Bad water," they said. But it wasn't the water. It was something older, something that lived in these mountains before the Cherokee, before anyone. It was hungry. The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees in seconds. My breath came out in clouds and the fluorescent lights began to flicker. It fed on the children first because they were pure, untainted. But it needed more. It always needs more. That's when I understood. The entity hadn't left when the children died. It had stayed, growing stronger, feeding on their trapped souls for 90 years, and now it was hungry again. The shadow children began to stand, their movements jerky and unnatural. They weren't children anymore. They were shells, puppet husks, controlled by something ancient and malevolent. "You work nights," Miss Warren said, her form becoming more solid, more real. "You're alone. Perfect." The children started moving toward me, their shadow feet making no sound on the floor. But I could feel them, a crushing cold that pressed against my chest, making it hard to breathe. I ran. Down the hallway, the children's voices following me, no longer reciting lessons but speaking in unison. "Join us, stay with us, feed with us." Their words echoed from every classroom I passed, as if hundreds of dead children were chanting from behind every door. The stairs felt wrong under my feet, like they were shifting, becoming steeper with each step. The building was changing around me, growing larger, older, becoming the school it was in 1932 when the children died. I reached the first floor, but the exit doors were gone. Where they should have been, solid walls covered in old photographs, class pictures from 1932, dozens of children's faces staring out at me. But their eyes moved, following me as I stumbled through the hallway. The janitor's closet. I had keys. I could lock myself in, think, figure out how to get out. But when I opened the door, Tommy was inside. He hung from the ceiling, his face purple and swollen, his eyes bulging. But his mouth moved, speaking in that same hollow chorus voice. "It got hungry, had to feed it, your turn now." I slammed the door and ran toward the gym. Behind me, the sound of children laughing, but the laughter was wrong. Too deep, too knowing, like adults pretending to be children, and forgetting how. The gym doors were open, and inside I could see them all. Not shadows anymore, but fully formed. Dozens of children from 1932, their faces gray and mottled, their clothing rotted and stained. They stood in perfect rows, all facing me, all smiling with too many teeth. Miss Warren appeared beside them, but now I could see what she really was. Something wearing her shape, something that had consumed her along with the children 90 years ago. Her face kept shifting, features rearranging themselves like wet clay. "The mountain is hungry," she said, her voice now coming from all the children at once. It's always been hung, why the Cherokee knew. That's why they left warnings, why they marked certain places as forbidden. But white men don't listen to warnings. The entity was older than human settlement, older than the mountains themselves. It had fed on Cherokee children first, then early settlers, then the kids from the school. Each feeding made it stronger, more capable of appearing human, of luring in new prey. Every October 24th, it feeds again, the Miss Warren thing continued. One adult to last the year. You're perfect. Alone, no family here to miss you immediately. By the time they find your body, we'll have stories ready. Accident. Fell down the stairs. Happens all the time. I backed toward the far wall, but my feet hit something soft. Looking down, I saw bones scattered across the gym floor. Adult bones, picked clean, some still wearing scraps of janitor uniforms. Tommy wasn't the first. There had been others, decades of others. Every night janitor who worked alone, every maintenance worker who stayed too late. The entity had been feeding steadily, carefully, never taking enough to draw attention. The children began moving toward me again, but now I could see through their human disguises. Underneath were things like massive insects, all legs and clicking mandibles, using the dead children's forms as camouflage. I found the emergency exit, the one that led directly outside. My hands shook as I worked the lock, and behind me the clicking sounds grew louder, more excited. The door opened onto October mountain air, clean and cold. I ran for my truck, the sound of pursuit behind me, not footsteps but skittering, like dozens of enormous beetles racing across concrete. My truck started on the third try. In the rearview mirror, I could see them pouring out of the school. Hundreds of them now. Not just children, but adults too, all the people the entity had consumed over the decades. They filled the parking lot, watching me go with eyes that reflected my headlights like mirrors. I drove until I hit the interstate and didn't stop until I was 3 states away. The nut. Idiots reported that I'd abandoned my post, that Tommy had been found dead of apparent suicide in the janitor's closet. They hired a new night janitor within a week, Carlos Mendez, 35, from Guatemala. Alone, no family nearby. I tried calling the school, tried warning them. But Carlos had already stopped answering his phone. That was 3 years ago. I work in a factory in Ohio now, day shift only. I've never been in an empty building after dark since. I still send money to Mexico for Elena. Got a bank loan for her surgery, paid the interest gladly. But every October I check the obituaries from that Kentucky county. Every year, another janitor, another maintenance worker, another person who thought they were just doing their job in an empty building. The entity is still there, still feeding, still wearing the faces of dead children to lure in new prey. And every October 24th, the mountain gets a little hungrier, a little stronger. I don't go to the mountains anymore. Some places are hungry, and once they've seen you, they never stop being hungry. The Cherokee were right to mark that place as forbidden. Some warnings should be listened to. Editor's note: Mountain View Middle School closed permanently in December 2022 following structural concerns. The building has been demolished. County records show 23 maintenance workers have died on the property since 1932, all ruled accidents or suicides. The demolition crew reported finding extensive bone fragments in the basement, which county officials attributed to an old burial ground. No further investigation was conducted.